Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where we sit down with people who give shape, texture, and voice to life on the North Fork of Long Island. Some are rooted here by generations, others arrived by chance or choice, but all carry with them a piece of the story. We talk about what's changing, what's worth holding on to, and the currents of history, both quiet and loud, that run through this place. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 225, we sit down with Patricia Hammes, a Greenport resident who has played a central role in shaping conversation about growth, planning, and community life in the village. Patricia brings a background that predates her time on the North Fork, and that broader experience has informed her work locally, most notably through her service as chair of the Greenport Planning Board, where she has dedicated a great deal of time and service to the community. In 2025, she also ran for the Greenport Village Board, coming just shy of a win and further solidifying her commitment to public service and civic engagement. Today we'll talk about her path to Greenport, what drew her into local governance, how she thinks about balancing change with preservation, and her hopes for the village's future. So I hope you enjoy episode 225 with Patricia Hammes. This episode was recorded August 14th, 2025. Thank you so much for coming on the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. It's really a pleasure to have you on today.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. And so in the beginning, I'd like to just start off if you can give us a little introduction about yourself and where you were born and raised.
Sure. So I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, lived there probably for about 2 years, moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, lived there probably 2 to 3 years, and then moved to Madison, New Jersey, which is kind of a suburb of New York City, probably best known for Drew University being there, and Fairleigh Dickinson, where one of the football teams probably, I don't know, the Jets or the Giants, I'm not a football person, trained, and that's where I, grew up. I didn't go to Madison High School. I went to Villa Walsh Academy, which was a private school up in Morristown, New Jersey. But other than that, I until I went to college, spent most of my years in Madison. I'm the oldest of 7 kids. There are 5 of us within 6 years of each other, so there was a bit of insanity in my house growing up. We moved to New Jersey because my dad had a PhD in mining engineering and got hired by Citibank to be their kind of main mining guy. And he traveled tremendously for that job. I would say he was gone like 3/4 of the year. And you're probably wondering why I'm telling you all of this now. Well, it does have something to do with the conversation, because I think it had a pretty big impact on me growing up, living in a household where my father went to a lot of really interesting places around the globe, and kind of what he did in terms of finance of mining projects and the like. In any event, when I graduated from a very small high school, 21 people in my graduating class, I would have, I think in retrospect, would have loved to have gone to NYU or someplace like that. But it's kind of hard when you go to a high school with 21 girls to think about going to a huge university in a big city. So I ended up at Bucknell University in Pennsylvania, where I majored in sociology and economics. And I started to kind of get really interested in land use and development even then. I thought I might want to go to law school at the time. I had, since I was a small child, been kind of obsessed with Perry Mason. I read all the Perry Mason books. I watched, Raymond Burr and Perry Mason. It was like a huge thing for me. I took a class in college that was kind of the sociology of law, where we had to go to a local law school and do research and write a paper. And I did that, and I was like, oh no, I don't want to do this. I also in college spent a semester in England and did a fair amount of traveling around Europe for the first time. In any event, by my senior year, I was really kind of focusing on the fact that I was really interested in development. And mostly by that, I mean economic development at the time they were called third world countries. I don't even know what the politically correct term is anymore for that. But, and I had it in my head that my dream job was going to work for USAID, which I guess today is probably not looked upon as a great thing. But I also recognized that with a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics, that was not going to be like my next step. Right. And so, you had kind of two options at that point to do. You could go on to graduate school, which a lot of my peers were doing in a variety of things, or you could join the Peace Corps, which was, kind of a step towards going into development. And so I did join the Peace Corps, and I really wanted to go to Africa. This was I'm going to date myself here, in the mid 80s. I graduated from college in 85. I really wanted to go to Africa because I was intrigued by the development challenges there, in terms of you have certain countries that have tremendous natural resource wealth, and then a tremendous high level of poverty in areas that have nothing, right? And Peace Corps was in Africa, but I had always also been a Spanish student. And the largest contingent of Peace Corps volunteers at that time, being that Peace Corps is a political agency to some extent, were in the Philippines. This was when Marcos was in power. And Honduras. And this was when the Contra War was going on in Nicaragua, and things were bad in El Salvador. And my father, who had done a lot of work in the Philippines, was like, absolutely not. He's like, there's going to be a coup there, which there was. You're going to be on some small island, and God knows what's going to happen. And I'm not sure that even would have been an option at the end of the day. Because of my Spanish background, Peace Corps offered me Honduras. And so I went. I joined a program there that was focused on youth development, which was a primarily urban program working with street kids. There's a saying about the Peace Corps, how it's the toughest job you'll ever love, and that seems kind of like whatever. But it's actually, I think, really true to some extent. To me, it was one of the really foundational experiences for me. I was just out of college. Was really, college, you start to stand on your own 2 feet, but now I'm in this very poor country with a lot of crime, a lot of U.S. military, a lot of spies, a lot of bad things going on around the area. And you kind of have to figure out who you are and how to stand on your own 2 feet. It was also really incredibly challenging. I remember when I was going through training, you have about 3 months of training in Peace Corps at the time, and they kind of drill into you that you can't quit. And I think the reason they do that is because it is so challenging, and it would be really easy to get there and, say, you know what, this isn't for me, I want to leave. But the U.S. government puts a lot, I think they probably still do, puts a lot of time, energy, and money into recruiting Peace Corps. At the time, it took about a year of different interviews and things to get into the Peace Corps. The training is very expensive. And so it's not that they're really telling you can't quit, right? But what they don't want you to do is just have this immediate visceral reaction of like, this is just too tough, I can't do it, I got to go home. And so, I spent about almost a little under 2 years. Peace Corps volunteer term is usually 2 years. And an incident happened that involved a Honduran who decided, as was their wont, to harass a bunch of American women. And a gun got fired. Nobody was hurt. But it was a very emotional and upsetting experience. And I was going to have to move from where I was, and I only had 3 months left. So I came home a little bit early from Peace Corps. But all of that, I kind of came home, and I had this idea that I wanted to do development, and I still was very interested in it. But what I had learned from that experience was that I'm really good at analytics and thinking and that type of thing. I'm not so good at chicken farming. And, different people have different theories of development. My theory of the importance of development was really grassroots, hands-on. And so I started to think a little bit more about what I was going to do with that. And in the interim, I went and got a job in New York City working for Chase, doing Latin American kind of work for a year and a half. And then I saw an ad in the New York Times, like who finds a job in the New York Times, right? But that was for the Office of Management and Budget for the city of New York in their community development group. And I thought, I was also at this time starting to revisit the law school thing, even though I had taken that class in college and been like, absolutely no way. I now had friends that were going to law school. I had kind of time to take a step back and was thinking, you know what, I've learned enough about myself to think that that might be the right path forward for me. Not so much going into court and being a litigator, but kind of the study of law, the application of law, and that kind of thing. So while I was thinking about that, I applied for the job with the city of New York, got hired, and I was a program manager for community development programs in New York City, mostly applying HUD funding for housing, seniors, historic preservation, some economic development. You know, it was interesting. I mean, I was still fairly kind of at the junior level, but it was really interesting. And I think if I hadn't gone to law school, I probably would have carried along that path. But I ultimately decided to apply to law school, applied to no schools in New York City because I thought, well, I have my life here. It's going to be too hard to make that transition to, you know, being a study nerd. Looked principally at California and Washington, D.C. and ended up at American University in D.C. for law school, which, again, I think after Peace Corps is like kind of my next transformational experience in my life because as nerdy as it will sound, I loved law school. I just loved it. It's like it clicked with me. My brain got it. I was scared to death going into it because I'd been an okay student in college, but I probably hadn't applied myself. And so I was a little nervous about the way law schools work, where it all comes down to a final exam and the like. But it just really was the right thing for me to do. And even though I didn't, again, want to be a litigator. I mean, as I've mentioned to you, even doing this podcast is a little nerve-wracking for me. I realize that there's so many things you can do with a law degree, right? Like there's so many people that you don't even know that are doing things that have a law degree because it teaches you a way of thinking. I think that's what the law does. And so I was fortunate enough because I was doing so well in school that I could apply to some of the big global firms. And I kind of thought, again, tying back into my interests of, you know, development, infrastructure, sustainability. I looked at firms that had what is called project finance groups or international focuses. And I ended up at a firm called Sherman and Sterling, which is now A&O Sherman, which is one of the largest, more preeminent global law firms in the country. Summered there, applied for clerkships because everybody was like, oh, you have to apply for a clerkship. And I was like, I don't want to be a litigator. They're like, well, apply for appeal clerkships. You've got the grades. Ended up getting an offer to clerk on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, which is based in Philadelphia and is the federal court of appeals that covers New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and the Virgin Islands. Is also the court that Justice Alito on the Supreme Court was on at the time. And my judge had been a former judge on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And I did that for, again, about a year and a half. Another really kind of formulative experience in terms of, as an appellate clerk, cases are on appeal. And you're kind of looking at what the lower courts did. And what I learned as part of that is, I worked on a couple of corporate cases, and I realized how important the words on a piece of paper can be because a change in words from one paragraph to a paragraph 3 pages later can actually have some impact. I later realized even more when I went back to work at the law firm that it may have been inadvertent that word change happened because it may have been some associate who was up all night doing it. But nonetheless, you know, judges tend to give meanings to the word on paper. So anyway, through all of this, I still was really interested in, development, planning, infrastructure. And I, in the back of my head had, you know what, I'm going to go to Sherman, work a couple of years, pay off my student loans, get some experience, do some like international stuff, which sounds really like sexy and attractive, right? Travel around the world, see the world. And then I'll go back and I'll do a master's or a PhD in urban planning or something, because that's what I think I want to do. I ended up really liking what I did at Sherman. I was doing as I said, was project finance, which is basically the development and financing of large infrastructure assets. So power plants, mines, roads, bridges, tunnels. The whole idea behind it is you have an asset that has a source of income that pays for it. So, and I did initially a ton of stuff in Latin America. So that tied back into my kind of Honduras experience and all of that. The firm asked me to go over and work on a huge restructuring transaction out of the Hong Kong office. So I did that for about 6 months, and then they asked me if I would stay. And at that point, I was about a 6th-year associate, which is when you have to kind of start thinking about what your long-term plan is at a law firm. It's usually your 8th, 9th year that you get put up for partner. I wasn't still sure I wanted to be a partner. I still had a little bit of I had the interest in planning, but I also really liked what I was doing. I took a 2-month sabbatical and went out to San Francisco and worked for Bechtel Corporation, which is a huge construction contractor. They, for instance, were the contractor on the Big Dig project up in Boston. And at the time, this was now in the 90s, they were also getting into kind of more economic startups and things like that overlapped with planning and construction and that type of thing. And I did that partly to see how I would like being in-house. Not so sure. Went back to the firm. Ended up making partner. Still continued to love my job till, I don't know, maybe 5 years into being a partner. And so now maybe might be a good time to talk about Greenport. I may circle back up to the firm in a minute. So right before I made partner, a year or two, 2001, I'd spent that time out in San Francisco. And one of the reasons I did that too was I had finally kind of hit that point of like, I love New York City. I love the vibrancy of it. I love like going out till 4 o'clock in the morning. You know, I was the quintessential work hard, play hard law associate, right? But I'm getting a little bit older. I'm kind of looking for a little bit more space in my life. And I'm thinking, well, maybe I need to go someplace where there's a little bit more, not rural, but more open space. And so that's why I was kind of considering California. I was like starting to get into wine, stuff like that. But, you know, my family was on the East Coast. My friends were on the East Coast. So when I came back, I was like, okay, maybe I never really understood why all these partners at the firm had these weekend homes, because to me, like the weekend was my free time to enjoy New York City. But I was like, maybe I should think about this. And I had never been out to Long Island. I don't even think I'd been on Long Island at all. I was obsessed with Long Island in college because one of the other things I did in college was I was ran my college radio station. I was a DJ. And there was a WLIR, I think it was, Long Island Railroad was like kind of the late 80s, you know, great radio station on Long Island. And so I was always kind of obsessed with Long Island without really knowing much about it. And I had started to read, I think this was about the time the North Fork started to get written up for the wineries out here. And I was also going through kind of, I think, a rough patch. And so one weekend in the summertime, my parents at that point were spending their summers in Maine. They were retired. But they came down and we said, you know what, let's take a drive out there. None of us had ever been. We didn't even know where we were going. Like we rented a car. I think we got like one of the last rental cars in New York City that weekend. And we got on the LIE and we drove and we drove and we drove and we got off in Riverhead. And, you know, there's the North Road and the Main Road, but we didn't even know that, right? Like, I think we probably obviously we got on the main road and we drove and we drove and we drove and we ended up in this little town village called Greenport. And we got out and we walked around and my mom was like, well, why don't you just go into a real estate office and ask them about real estate? And I was like, oh, that's kind of crazy, right? I've never been here before. But I really liked the feel immediately. I mean, I'd grown up in New Jersey. Most people in New Jersey grew up going to the Jersey Shore. And that had been in the back of my mind as a place I could look at. But I had never been a Jersey Shore girl. My family went to Maine for summer vacations. And I am a water person wholeheartedly, but I'm not a go sit all day at the beach person. So
Well, what year was that?
So this was 2001,
2001.
right?
Okay.
This was the summer of 2001, and we all know what happened in September of that year,
Mhm.
right? So I did go and look at a couple of houses, and Mae Watson, who a lot of people in this community know, I think she passed away earlier this year or last year. She originally was one of the people that owned what is now American Beach, back when I think it was called the Cinnamon Tree. At this point, she didn't own it anymore, but she was the real estate agent I worked with, and she showed me this little house right around the corner from the library on 2nd
Mhm.
Street. It was an estate sale, and I'm not going to say how much it was, but you could Google it. It was not very much. And I looked at that. I looked at a few other houses outside of the village, and I just at the spur of the moment was like, you know what? I think this might be the right place for me. And so a couple weeks later, one of my sisters and I came back out and stayed with a friend who had a family home up in Mattatuck, which I'd
Mhm.
never put two and two together before this. But and I looked at some houses up there, and I kind of kept coming back to this little house in Greenport. Like, it was in a walkable community because I didn't even own a car at this
Mhm.
point, right? Like, I was like a quintessential New York person. Wasn't very much. I really liked the feel of Greenport. It just seemed like a real place. Like, there were real people that lived here.
Mhm.
And so I thought, well, what's the worst case here? Is I put in an offer, I buy this house. A year from now, if I find I've made a big mistake, I sell the house, right?
Mhm.
So I went into contract in late August, and then September 11th happened.
Mhm.
And it's funny because one of my other sisters and a friend of mine got in a car right after, everybody got out of the city right after that happened. And we were like, well, let's drive out here because I hadn't bought the house yet. And the Green Porter, I think it was like the very first day that it had reopened under Deborah and her husband, or the
Mhm.
first weekend, because like the phones weren't even hooked up. But we checked into the Green Porter and we spent a couple of days out here, and it was kind of just such a calming and rejuvenating experience after having lived through what happened in New
Mhm.
York City on September 11th, that it kind of reinforced me having bought this house. And I guess the rest of it is history. I mean, I lived in that house for about 10 years. My then partner, now husband, started to come out regularly with me. And I have a big family. I don't have children. But I have a big family with lots of nieces and nephews, and I have lots of friends. And the house would just get full, like to the point where we'd have like a tent in the backyard for people to sleep in. And we were
Mhm.
like, it was a great house for that time in our life, but we kind of were thinking more long term that we'd want to be out here more. And so every time something came on the market in Greenport, we would go and look at it. I wanted to stay in the village. I think my husband would have rather have gone out towards Orient, as he says, when you go across the causeway, the light changes. Um, but the kind of upside of being right in the heart of the village really just, I think it appealed to both of us.
Mhm.
And so at one point, I was out here on a Friday, and I was sitting at Bruce's looking through the paper, and I saw that the house I now live in, which is 603 Main Street, which was known as the Corwin House, but had also been partially in the Claudio family. And we'd always wondered about it. It was a big white house on the corner, very set back, and there'd be a light on it, but you never saw any people there. And I don't think anybody had lived in it for a while at that point. It was an estate sale too. So I went and I looked at it, and I called my husband up, and I was like, "We have to buy this house." And we went back that weekend and looked at it. He's like, "We're not buying this house." He's like, "It needs all new plumbing. It needs all new electrical. Like, it just, it was a mother-daughter. It had two kitchens. One kitchen was in an
Mhm.
area that didn't have a foundation." And so for about a year, there was a negotiation that went on. And we eventually bought it and restored it. And then I started spending more and more time out here. And so circling back to my work.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we're commuting from the city on weekends. I'm getting less and less thrilled with what I'm doing. My husband's a few years older than me, so he was getting closer to retirement. And then the firm asked me if I would mind going and being based in the Washington, D.C. area, because I did a lot of work with the Department of Transportation, the Department of Energy, and some of the multinational institutions that are down there. And, I said, you know what? Yeah, sure. Why not? I kind of needed to get out. Like, the office in New York is huge and the office in DC was small. And so for the last 5 years that I was working, I was kind of doing this weird commute between DC, Greenport, and New York. And the big upside of it was nobody ever knew where I was. And as long as I got my work done, I could kind of be almost most of the time wherever I wanted to be. So I was out here more and more. My husband was not. He would come out on weekends. I started paying. I'd always kind of paid attention to what was going on in Greenport. But I started to pay more and more attention, and I was really interested in getting involved. But my job was crazy. Like, when I was working, it was very intense. I didn't have really any control over my schedule, which was one of the things that had finally kind of grated on me. The constant phone calls at 5:00 on Friday with the, "We're sending you a document. We need comments by 9 a.m. tomorrow." "How long have you had this document for?" "A week." And so I didn't at the time really feel like I could make a real commitment, but I would pop up at board meetings where I could on issues that I cared about. And eventually in 2018, my husband hit his full retirement age. And we kind of had decided that instead of me going and finding another job and trying to figure out how we were going to balance all that, because I did not want to keep doing what I was doing anymore at that point, that I would retire as well at a relatively youthful age for retirement. We were fortunate enough that we had enough money saved and various things that we thought we could do that. So we had bought a house in Florida thinking we might do the snowboard thing. Quickly got over that. Fortunately held on to it, though, renting it till the pandemic when we sold it for some money. But we, gave up the apartment in the city, I had an apartment in DC, and said, you know what, this is where we want to be. And so then I started looking around for anybody that's not, I guess this doesn't happen for everybody that retires, but I hadn't really thought that much about what I was going to do when I was retired. And you got to find something to fill your time with, right? And so the planning board had some openings on it, and it kind of circled back to all those interests of mine that I mentioned earlier. So I wrote a letter to then Mayor Hubbard and said, I'm really interested in being on the planning board, and, here's my background and why I think I would have something to add. And there were 2 openings at the time, and Lily had just ran for trustee and not been elected. It was the first time she ran. So she got put on, and then he put me on. And so that was in 2018. So I've been on the planning board for quite a while now. I'm on my second 5-year term.
Were there any, like you mentioned your background, but were there any other issues that gravitated towards wanting to be on the planning board, or? Well, it definitely combined into my interests, right? But even, I guess more importantly, I got my first house here, started spending time here when the Frisky Oyster first opened and the Greenporter first opened, right? Which, as I understand it from people that were here before that, was kind of the turning of the curve for Greenport, associated also with the great work that former Mayor Capel led down in the revitalization of Mitchell Park. But there was still, Greenport was much more of a full-time place then. And I loved that about it, right? Like when I was first going to buy a house here, my parents were talking to some people somewhere, and they said, our daughter's looking at a house out in Greenport, Long Island. And these people were from Long Island, and they were like, that's an interesting kind of diverse place. Like, diverse was not a great word, right? And my parents told me this, and I was like, well, first of all, I live in New York City, so I don't know what that means. Second of all, like, I don't want to go live at a beach town. I don't want to go to the Hamptons. I don't want to go down to the Jersey Shore. Like, I want to be someplace that has kind of a realness about it. So
long answer to your question. I think I started to be concerned about what was going on in terms of development and the future of the Greenport and how much focus there was on things and the like. I also thought that it would be something I really could bring a skill set to that would really be helpful because I don't know, my mind is kind of like thinks about everything as like a Rubik's Cube or a puzzle. I feel like you've got to turn all the pieces around and eventually they'll hopefully more or less fit into place. And it seems like that's kind of a lot of what goes into planning and zoning. But, when I started out on the planning board, I was a novice. I mean, I hadn't been doing planning per se. I mean, I'd been doing a lot of things that are similar skill set and risk allocation and looking at, pluses and minuses of development and that kind of thing. But I think the first couple of years when I was a member on the board, I really was kind of in learning mode. And I think over time, I felt like I developed the ability to, I think, assert myself a little bit more and ask questions. I think there was a point in the village for a long time, and maybe this is another reason why I got involved, where, and at the time it may have made sense, right? It was before there were all the development pressures out here. I think there was a time where kind of anything went, right? Like if you had an idea and you knew somebody, you could kind of walk in and get your permits. And I don't know that the kind of critical analysis of some of these things was going on, but maybe it didn't really matter at that time. But the longer I was on the planning board, the more I was kind of surprised that we didn't ask kind of questions that the purview of the planning board, right, is to review proposals to see how they fit in with kind of the character of the community and what the impacts will be on kind of health, safety, and welfare of the community, right? And those are big, important things. And people wanted to just talk about whether the landscaping was going to be maintained. And that's not important, right? Like that does go to the character. Or we would have a member who was always focused on ADA compliance. Again, really important. But ADA compliance is a building code issue. Like that's the job of the building department. Like we don't oversee construction. We don't even oversee enforcement. But we, really are supposed to take the things that are required to come before us and really take a hard look at them and how they fit in and what the long-term impacts are going to be. And I think a lot of people misunderstand the planning board from that perspective, or they think, we're Machiavellian or we're, it's really frustrating to me because I have no skin in the game other than being a resident in the village. I don't own a business. I've never owned a business. I don't have an investment. I only really care about what is, I think, going to help the village. And I've seen, some really troublesome trends. Like, housing right now is just, I don't know why everybody isn't talking about housing and banging on the table about housing. We've lost so many full-time residents just within the block that I live on within the last 5 years. Some of them were long-term, second, third, fourth generation Greenporters. Some of them were more recent, but for a variety of reasons, people can't afford to stay here. Either they were renters and they've been priced out because of the rent, or they're getting closer to retirement and they're sitting on a house that's worth a lot of money, but they don't necessarily, it's their only asset, and it's now worth a lot of money, and it's cheaper to go live in Florida or the Carolinas or whatever. And so I've seen that happen. I've seen a change in the business community, right? We still have a lot of vibrant young people that are starting businesses here. I think they find it increasingly challenging with the rents, right? Like, I mean, I look at, for instance, like Veme down in downtown across from the theater. And that to me was like one of the best additions in Greenport in the last couple of years. It's like we need more of that kind of thing. We need activities for young people. We need activities for older people. We need, a place where people can go year round, right? But they're moving, and I think a lot of it has to do with rents, right? They because the other thing that's happened is when I was out here, the arcade, everybody wants to talk about the arcade. I don't really want to talk about the arcade, okay? I will talk about the arcade in the kind of like there was a store where you could go and buy your Tupperware, which I guess you can do at the IGA, but or you could buy sewing needles. I mean, you could buy Christmas ornaments.
A little bit of everything.
You know, there was the hardware store. There were stores that were open all year round where you could get things. And frankly, most of the restaurants and bars were open year round. Now, we had vacancies even then. Downtown, you know, everybody says now, oh my God, the vacancies are the worst we've ever seen. I don't really believe that. I mean, I think the village has always gone through cycles of vacancies between rents and other issues that cause people to not be able or not be willing to rent commercial businesses out. But you have seen for sure, I mean, it started before COVID, and COVID accelerated the seasonality because of what it did to the real estate market out here, to make it increasingly difficult for businesses to be open year round. And that drives you more and more into, okay, what businesses do best seasonally. But even those businesses, I don't think are doing great, right? Because that's a tremendous pressure to have to make, you know, in 3 months what you would rather be doing, you know, kind of more consistently at a greater overall amount in a year. So like all of those things are things that I think about all the time. And I think about them when applications come before us. I think about it when I'm also, so there was a code committee for a while that was working on rewriting the village code, and I was on that. That committee's kind of been disbanded for at least for the time being. The planning board is kind of focusing on the zoning chapter. And then there's the new housing group that Denny Gordon is running is focusing on some other things. But I have also been appointed as, I think, I'm not sure of the exact title, chair of the code committee for the waterfront advisory committee, which I think is, you know, eventually we're going to be having to do work on that as the LWRP process moves forward. But I think that, so anyway, I spend a lot of time reading code, which I guess is kind of a twisted, terrible thing for anybody to have to do in their life. But again, I guess it's the lawyer in me coming out. I don't mind doing it. I you know, I see all the holes in it. But yeah, so I don't know if that answered your last question or not. I feel like now I'm kind of just going around in circles. But, you know, there's a lot of challenges, right? And you need to be even-handed. And then you also have to function in a backdrop where people don't have all the information and people have their own agenda and they go out and say something and make it sound like this is it. This is all it is. And it's never all that it is. And frankly, nobody's opinion is necessarily ever 100% the right opinion or the right thing for the community. So you have to, I think, listen to all those things and try to balance them and figure out, you know, what is the right thing. And the other thing on the planning is what people don't always realize is most of the things that we approve, they're not specific to the applicant in front of us, right? So frankly, it would almost be better if the name wasn't attached to the application, because it's very hard once you've approved something and then it sells to somebody else who maybe takes it in a direction that nobody thought it was going to go in. You can't really claw back that approval at that point. So that's why when I look at applications, I think about all the permutations and consequences going out. And then I think about what are the needs of the community, you know, and I actually keep going back to housing. A couple of years ago, went over to Sag Harbor to the church for an event on housing issues over there. And I sat there and I listened and I thought, we already have this at the beginning of this issue, but it's only going to get worse. And it so much affects the community because the teachers don't live in the community, right? So you have to hire because they can't afford to live here. So they commute from an hour and a half away. The first time they can get a job closer to where they're going to live, they're going to go, for the most part. They aren't going to necessarily stay later and later into the day because they need to get home and they've got the commute. So it makes them less part of the community, which the school is so important for a community. It's probably the same thing here in the library, right? And then you get to the fire department and emergency services. And you look at that and you think that's all volunteer. Like, where do those volunteers come from? Like, as you make it harder and harder for people that have lived here their whole lives, or even for people to live here full time that are younger, right? I mean, the North Fork is what they call a NORC, a naturally occurring retirement community, but those aren't necessarily the people that are going to go and volunteer for the fire department. Where are those people going to come from? Where are the people that are going to volunteer for our boards, both at Southold and Greenport? I mean, we struggle because particularly the village, because we're such a small area, with people that are willing to commit the time and have the right skill set, right? And then you look at, large employers of what should be good year-round jobs: the hospital, Peconic Landing, STID Systems. I mean, there's probably countless others, without even focusing on kind of traditional working waterfront. And where are they getting their employees from? And how long can they stay and sustain being in a community? I mean, maybe the hospital and Peconic Landing are kind of unique, but for other businesses, how long can you stay in a community where your employees can't afford to live? I mean, I think about this, Southold's going through its zoning rewrite right now, and there's been this huge backlash from the Southold business community about it, and I guess now Southold's going to regroup. But I think you have to listen to the business community. I think you have to listen to it in the village. I mean, they're an important part of the equation. They're the economic engine, but they have one viewpoint and one, way of looking at things. And then there are other ways. And when you're on a board or you're in the government, I think you kind of need to listen to them. You need to listen to the civics groups. You need to listen to a lot of, I mean, the planning board for the last 4 months has been trying to do a lot more outreach, partly because I think also our board of trustees there's so much for them to do. They can't get to everything. Those are like limited, almost volunteer. They're paid so little jobs. And so, to the extent that we can help pick up some of that work and do community outreach and focus on the thing that's kind of within our province of being advisory on, that's something, we're trying to do. We did the survey. We've, had open hearings. We've encouraged people to reach out. Again, you can't make people participate that don't want to. But again, I think I'm going around in circles about things that I care passionately about these things. So
they're all important issues. But you're the planning board chair now. Since coming on in 2018, you've probably seen a lot of challenges. And what do you think's the most challenging part about that role?
Yeah, probably having to say no or slow down. I mean, I don't actually even know that we've ever said no. We have definitely said slow. I mean, we've started since the code changes, we've put in place this pre-submission process for large projects where we give reports to the applicants with all of our concerns. And we've done a couple of those, and frankly, none of those projects have moved forward. And I would guess if you talk to those applicants, they would say we've made it too difficult for them. I would say we raised legitimate concerns that needed to be addressed. And you can't just say we're not going to address those concerns. And that's kind of what I think some of the applicants have done. There are other reasons. I mean, it's all been in the press. The village has been struggling with internal village administration issues for the last year in the building department. And that's not a good situation. It's not good for the planning board. It's not good for the community. Hopefully those things are getting sorted out. But the biggest challenges, I think, are trying to say we need to do our job, because people we're used to, I mean, I saw it when I first started on the planning board. There was really no discussion. It was kind of like, oh yeah, okay. I mean, I was like, why are we even meeting? I mean, I think a perfect example was, and it was partly a code problem, was all of the south side of Front Street. So that would be the side that Mitchell Park is on. And then the corresponding piece of North Street. So kind of where Lucharitos and Claudio's is, that side of the street, not North Street, Main Street. That all used to be zoned waterfront commercial. And in waterfront commercial, things like retail and restaurants are what we call a conditional use, which means they're not permitted as of right. They need special approval. And the whole point of a conditional use is it's been identified as something that may fit in to the community, but it needs to have a higher degree of scrutiny because it is more likely to create adverse effects. And over time, well before I was on the planning board, almost all those areas I just described had become pretty much solely retail and restaurants and hotels, right? Like you would have been hard pressed to identify one business that might fall within a waterfront maritime frame. You could argue, for instance, there's a store down there that sells the bags that are made out of old sails, right? Maybe that does because it uses sails from a sailboat. Probably Little Creek Oysters did because they, you know, they were started out as an oyster shucking. In any event, so every time a business changed down in that area, they had to come to the planning board. And frankly, there was never any discussion. We just kind of approved them. Now, do I think that was the wrong thing? No, I don't. I think that's where the community that's where that area had gotten to, which is frankly why when we redid the code 2 years ago, we just rezoned it commercial retail. So those things are permitted as of right. But if you're on the planning board and it's a conditional use, you should be asking questions. You may ultimately conclude that because of the factors around it, it's the right thing. Maybe that the character has changed enough that it fits in with that, which would have been the case with all this. But you should have that conversation. You should have that analysis. And so that's the way I look at it. And that's the way I've been trying to drive the board that I chair is to say we can't, and then the other thing is you need to take your self-interest out of things too, to the extent you have it, right? Like I don't necessarily like certain things or just, I may be in favor or not personally, but my personal likes and dislikes don't really matter. But I think the hardest and the biggest challenge for me, particularly as chair, has been one, dealing with the community's expectations or an applicant's expectations that they should just get what they want without any discussion and frankly without being willing to compromise. And then frankly for the last year it's been dealing with a building department that is, and a year ago I wouldn't have said this on this podcast because I was trying to deal with things behind the scenes. I think for the last 6+ months, I've been more outspoken about it in public because it's really challenging. And if it's challenging for us, I'm sure it's challenging for applicants. And I don't take that lightly. And I know people are worked up about it. And, I'm pushing as much as I can to make the changes and get the trustees to focus on things. It's, we can get to that topic again, why I for 3 days ran for Village Board of Trustees. But, those are the big challenges in the job. And frankly, my board doesn't even always understand it. I have board members that are like, why is this coming up at the last minute? And I'm like, you have no idea. My husband threatens to divorce me. I probably spend at least 20 hours a week doing stuff for this village for free.
Wow.
Looking at things, reading things, trying to think through things. I mean, some weeks it's a little bit less, some weeks a little bit more, depends on what's on our agenda. But really almost acting in some respects, I feel like I'm almost acting as not just the planning board, but the planning department, right?
Because there's no,
the village is really resource constrained. We're financially, that's the other thing that people don't understand is how financially constrained this village is. Like everybody's like, oh, there's no enforcement and that's a big problem and we need to fix it. But, people don't want their property. I don't want my property taxes to go up anymore. And I'm probably somebody who can afford my property taxes. I mean, I don't know, there's really tough decisions that people have to make. And it's easy to sit at home and point fingers. It's challenging.
But let's talk about even when you ran for village board, because that was almost kind of last minute, but that was close. What were you hoping to?
Well, so for years people have asked me to run for office, and if it's not clear from this conversation, it should be. I am not a politician. Like I don't play politics. I'm frankly too blunt. It was something I was criticized for when I was a lawyer. Sometimes it was viewed as being disrespectful. I don't have a lot of patience. I'm kind of like, this is the answer. Could we just please get to it? And so, and I really have always thought that I served a really valuable role being involved in the planning board and also being a citizen that could get up at meetings and put checks or make points to the board of trustees. So I didn't really have any interest in running for office. The other component of that is, as part of my retirement, is I travel. It was part of the thing when we retired, and we go away usually twice a year for a month or so. I make it work with the planning board, but being a trustee would be that much more of a commitment. And in fact, having said all that, back in December and January, as I kind of really was looking at what was going on in the village, I finally was like, well, maybe I need to put my big boy pants on and maybe consider running for trustee, right? Like, because maybe I can help. But we had a long-standing trip planned to go to India for 3.5 weeks in late February, March, which was not getting canceled. And so I was like, well, I can't really credibly run for office and not be here, right? That's not going to work. And I was hopeful that there would be, as I always am, that there would be good candidates that would step up to run. And I have a lot of respect for all 5 people that stood up to run. I mean, 2 of them have been involved in the village for a long time, the 2 incumbents that got reelected. And the 3 other people all brought something that, their involvement. I think, one of them is in the fire department. Margaret has done a lot with the repair clinic here and other things. And Rorik is relatively new to the game, but obviously has some really great ideas. But anyway, I went off to India and I was kind of keeping track of things while I was here. And people just kind of were like, oh, this is who are we gonna, we don't know that, people would say, I have one person I can vote for, but I'm not sure who my second person was. And I came back and I was like, you know what? I kind of maybe feel the same way. And frankly, I didn't feel like, I hate to say this in public, because I really do have a lot of respect for all 5 people that ran. It takes a lot to stand up and do that. But I felt like everybody was playing to their own base. And nobody was really trying to reach around and say, yeah, I fit in because everything's getting so fractured, even nationally, right? And I feel like I see that more and more here too, and it disturbs me to no end. When people that have lived here forever say that people call them leftovers, if people do that, that's terrible and they shouldn't be doing it. I've frankly never heard somebody say that, but at the same time, calling people that are new here idiots isn't really helpful either, right? So, those are the 2 worst examples that you see out there. But even I felt like with the people that were running, based on the people that I knew in the village, it just felt like there was not a lot of crossing of those kind of lines. And also, I did feel like maybe we needed some new blood on the board, but I wasn't sure that the 3 people that were running that were new, which I had really hoped to see rise to the occasion, frankly, for the most part, I'd never seen them at board meetings. Right?
Yes.
And so I went on I usually go and walk in the morning around the village, and I went on my walk and I was like, I might write myself in. I might write myself in. I might write myself in. And then I was like, well, if I'm going to write myself in, maybe I should let people know I'm going to write myself in, because so many people have been asking me to run for office. So I threw the Hail Mary. I got out the word the best I could using, social media and people. I, went down. I said, I'm going to be in Aldo's. Anybody who wants to come and talk to me, I'll go anywhere. You tell me, I'll show up and meet you. Reached out to people that, I hadn't always necessarily agreed with, and had a much better showing, frankly, than I anticipated going into it. And I didn't expect I would win, I guess, but I'm really glad I did it, because it really reinvigorated me. I have to say I was feeling a little beaten. I mean, that's the other challenge with these kind of positions, is you can feel really beaten down sometimes. Even if you know that you're doing the best that you can and you're doing, frankly, a better job than some others might do. It's kind of, these jobs, all of them, including the trustees, are thankless tasks, because you're never going to please everybody. And frankly, you're probably not going to please anybody the way they want to be pleased. And so having that kind of turnout and support from people really reinvigorated me. and made me think, you know what? There are things that I can do without being on the board of trustees. I chair this board. It's an important board within, our mandate under not just under village code, but under New York State village law. We are an advisory board on planning and zoning matters. I've got a good board. I think the board we have is a great board, really committed people with different backgrounds. We've got 2 fire department members. We've got Elizabeth, who has a great background in she helped put the planning board survey together. That's kind of her bailiwick, is surveys and analyzing that kind of data. And Frances, who has a background in economic development. So it's like a really great group of people that the only thing we're maybe missing is an architect or an engineer, but like we have an engineering consultant that should be covering that off. So that kind of made me spend, that's why for the last months we've been focused on trying to do as much outreach and get as much feedback as we can. And I think by the end of, we're going to have a meeting we're having a special meeting that we're scheduling in early September just with the business community. We've got 2 other board meetings between now and then, and we're going to be discussing some of the big picture items like housing, like vacancies, like parking, hate to say that word, the P word, and frankly, some more mundane things like how our application process and approval process works, and hopefully going to submit to the Board of Trustees by the end of September a list of suggested topics for code amendments with some specifics, but not all of them around them for them to consider. And I don't think that necessarily those are not going to be 100% baked. They're not even necessarily going to be things that the full board is 100% sure of, but they're going to be the things that we take from the community that we think are the topics that really need to rise to the top of discussion. Because ultimately it's the Board of Trustees that needs to provide the direction and is the ultimate decision maker.
Yes. And just looking to the future, do you see yourself running again?
So I have told people that I will run again in 2 years, probably, or a year and a half. If I feel similar to how I felt this way around, in that I'd rather not be a trustee, all things being equal. Partly because of my personality. I'm like, I don't, and I feel like I'm really good at this job. And so if there were candidates that I thought were great, I don't need to compete for that. Like, I don't need that ego boost. Right. But if not, or if, I feel like if the public support is there, a lot of things can change in a year and a half. But yeah, as of right now, I'm planning on running in a year and a half. Okay. It's I guess a civic duty thing in these times, push us all to sometimes go outside of our comfort zone.
And just looking to the future, what are your personal hopes for Greenport and its community 5 to 10 years down the line?
Well, one, I hope we come up with some solutions for full-time year-round housing. And the village alone can't solve that. We really need, there was a Board of Trustees meeting earlier this week on this very topic that I participated in, and it really relates to the Southold zoning changes. We really need the town to make this they need to treat this with the same seriousness that they do protecting the farmland out here. Businesses aren't going to thrive without employees. Our schools are going to continue to lose students. It's just, so I'd like to see, some real life solutions to that. I'd like to see more of a vibrant year-round economy. That's a hard one, right? Like, this is not a Greenport issue. This is a macroeconomic issue of the Amazon behemoths of the world. But, I'd like to see more businesses maybe that provide services or activities and culture. I'd love to see the theater continue to grow with the programming that it's doing. I'd love to see the auditorium revitalized and brought back. Those are all the things that I hope for. They're all challenges, and they all, from any number of perspectives, they're, financial challenges, they're, socioeconomic challenges. I definitely want to see us retain our waterfront. Like, I don't, a big concern of mine is what happens with the shipyard when Steve Clark is no longer around. And I think what the county is looking at right now with this Waterfront Protection Act would be really a great first step in that direction. Because right now we've kind of protected it through zoning, but zoning can change. So the only real way to protect that is going to be similar to the farmland out here, is to buy development rights. And there's a trade-off there, because you want that to be a working waterfront area. So yeah. I don't that's an area that I don't know enough about legally to really opine on, but that's something I worry a lot about. I worry about the financials of the village being able to, maintain its basic infrastructure. And I think they really need to get innovative about how they're going to deal with their budget issues, because if they keep raising property taxes, it's going to keep exasperating the housing situation. But we can't – what people don't understand is how much of the village's budget doesn't actually come from property taxes. It comes from Mitchell Marina. It comes from the campground over on McCann's campground. It comes from actually even the carousel and the businesses that the villages runs, like the sewer and the water and the power. And so, when everybody complains about their taxes going up, the actual dollars amount aren't that huge. Percentage wise it is, but when you look at the budget, that's only a very, not the smallest piece, but it's not people I think always think, oh, the property taxes is the whole budget. It is not. And if our infrastructure goes, that is just going to put us in a hole. So those are all the things that I think, I want to see a focus on and doing the best that we can to fix and address them. And it unfortunately takes a tremendous amount of work and time. And then it takes you back to the financial issue, because the village has very limited resources on staff. They can't, and housing, because you could hire somebody, but they got to find a place to live. And so then how much are you going to pay, for instance, a code enforcement person, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's an onion. You peel one layer off and there's another layer and there's another layer, or pulling a string in a ball of yarn. It's challenging. I think we can do it. I mean, not solve all the problems. Like, God, if we did, we'd be utopia. But I think that there's a lot of people that care about this village. I think we need to really focus on making decisions that go to the long-term sustainability, the coastal resiliency, and as much of a year-round population as we can, that's the biggest challenge right now, because you have snowbird, the naturally occurring retirement community. You have the snowbirds that are only here the winters. I love it out here in the winter. I don't like March so much, but January and February are great. But it's challenging. And if I was a young person, it would be challenging. And if I had to work out here, it would be challenging. And if I didn't own a house out here, it would be challenging. So what are we going to do?
Yes. And because you mentioned just people getting involved, and you put in a lot of hours over the years.
You don't have to put that many. I mean, I'm unusual because I'm a little bit of a freak in that I actually like reading the code and reading other codes and thinking about what the best way is to do something. It's just like I get a personal, intellectual benefit out of it. So I don't want to scare people off by saying that you have to put 20 hours a weekend. I think at the end of the day, you probably get as much out of this as you put into it. But I think you can easily start out on a statutory board or one of the committees and, spend a couple of hours a week doing a little bit of background and participating in a meeting. It's probably, frankly, like, for instance, I think the housing committee that's newly formed, I went to their meeting last night. I don't know if they're meeting once or twice a month, but let's say you were on that housing committee. I'm sure Dinny's doing more like what I'm doing, that amount of work. But I think if you were a member, you could probably have like a 10-hour commitment for the month and be fine. Like between like showing up for say it's 2 meetings. Let's say the meetings are 2 hours each. That's 4 hours. And then you have 6 hours, if that, of doing kind of prep work and reading. That means that there's somebody like me in the background that's doing the work to give you the resources. But not everybody has to do that, right? Now, obviously,
Yes.
the more people that do it, I couldn't have, for instance, done the planning board survey by myself. I
Mm-hmm.
kind of tasked that out to Elizabeth and Francis, one, because it's not my skill set.
Mm-hmm.
And that would have taken more time than just being a planning board member would be.
Mm-hmm.
But they could have said no.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are so many ways that you can get involved. You can get involved by just paying attention. Sign
Mm-hmm.
up for the village newsletter. Sign up for the civics group, and like pay attention and hear what's going on. And if you can't get to a meeting, shoot off an email.
Mm-hmm.
Shoot it to the board of trustees. Shoot it to the planning board. Shoot it to the HPC. Shoot it to, everybody's, frankly, to go to my point, we should be in a community where people are too busy to do this stuff, because it would mean that they have jobs and kids and families.
Mm-hmm.
So it's balancing act. But I think you can get involved and not do what I'm doing,
Yes.
and still be really effective. And then the more you get into, the thing is longer. I always have this thing where I'm like, oh, well, I'm not going to pay attention to that. It's kind of how I felt about the Southold zoning changes, frankly. I was like, because I already am spending so much time thinking about this area. And then
Mm-hmm.
I'll like go to a board meeting, or I'll watch, if you don't have time to go to the board meeting, you can watch them on tape. And I'll be like, oh, I thought that was, like, I will say the Mitchell Park bulkhead was one issue. I just assumed for the last year that was kind of under control. I'm not so sure it is under control. So now I have to dig in. Like for me, I'm going to dig in. I have the time. This is like all I do, right? Like I'm not working anymore. I have a few other hobbies. I should probably do more of them. My husband's after me to sew him some more shorts. I took up sewing during COVID, I was trying to knit for a while, and I haven't been doing much of that. So there are a lot of other things I should be spending my time doing. And I love reading, and I like to, cook and all of that kind of stuff. But, when I hear something, suddenly I'll be like, okay, I got to go get my arms around that. And so
Mm-hmm.
pick one thing that you heard about,
Mhm.
try to figure it out, and then try to think about it from different people's perspectives and propose solutions. Don't just like bang on a table and be like, well, this is what I want.
Mm-hmm. No, that's important. The one other question I had was just, you mentioned when you're not working.
What do I do with myself? Well, I travel.
You
I
travel.
plan trips. I love planning trips. We did actually, one of the reasons why I was so delayed doing this with you was when you first approached me, we were going to Australia for 2 months, and I planned that whole trip. And
Okay.
we probably have now seen more of Australia than some Australians have seen.
Mm-hmm.
So we like to travel, and I tend to plan most of our
Mhm.
trips. Like India, I didn't plan. We did that through a tour group because that was just beyond me at this point in my life. But and we've got, the other thing I love about Greenport is we have such a great community of friends here. Like I
Mhm.
don't even, like we knew people before we were out here full time, and they were friends, but like and maybe part of it was the whole thing going through COVID, but the extended group of, and every time like there's a group of women that I missed today because I was coming to do this, that have coffee
Mhm.
every other week at Aldo's, that a lot of them I never knew before,
Mhm.
and now some of them are getting to be better friends. So I love talking to people. I love, talking to people about their interests. I love hearing about what they think about the village. I like to cook.
Mhm.
I like to strategically have my young nieces come and visit. They come a couple times a year from Brooklyn, the youngest ones of my youngest sister. And I don't know, like I said, I should get back to my sewing and knitting. I like to
Mhm.
read.
Mhm.
I like to go to all the, events that we can do in the village. I think like the theater has been a great addition. They've got
Mhm.
some great stuff coming up. We're going to go to, there's, I think, a blues show next weekend that we're going to go to
Yes.
there.
Mhm.
The art community is great here. Like what you guys do and Sally does here in the
Mhm.
library is just phenomenal. Frankly, I think she deserves a much better platform even than the library for some of the work
Mhm.
that she does. Kara's space is great downtown. And I think a lot of the businesses are trying to be more creative. Like you look at some of the stuff Aldo's has been doing with like
Mhm.
kind of later in the evening events, teaming up with some of the arts and things like that. So those are all things that I like to do when I can.
Mhm.
The problem is I could also go out then every night. I'm too
Yeah.
old to go out every night. So there is a balancing in all of that.
Yes, definitely. I think we covered everything. Was there any last minute thing you'd like to say or discuss that we haven't talked about?
I don't think so. Hopefully I haven't been too all over the place.
No.
I think as you can tell, I care passionately about
Mhm.
this community. I know for the Greenporters that are multiple generations, I'm a newcomer and I'll always be a newcomer. And that's fine. I am vis-a-vis them. But like, this is my home. This is like the one place in my life, for all of my life, that I can remember really feeling like it was my home. Like my heart is here. Like when I go away and I come back, I mean, it was even more so when I was working, just that getting in the car to drive out here, you could just feel like, But it's, I don't know, there's a sense of peace, and it's just, so that's probably it. I'll keep fighting my good fight.
Yes, definitely. No, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on today and share your story and your career and all the work you've been doing out here. It's really important for the community. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been great.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 225 with Patricia Hammes. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.